Hi there, and welcome to Broadband Deployment News. So fiber seems to be where it's at as far as deploying broadband to new service areas, but let's not forget about fixed wireless. That's what we'll be talking about today. Be right back. Thanks for joining me. Rick Husey here with Broadband Deployment News. And we do hear a lot about fiber as service providers are thinking about what they can do to deploy broadband in new areas, specifically also to try to close the digital divide, to close the gaps where we have broadband service. And that even goes for cable companies. So cable companies that are serving current areas right now, if they edge out into a new service area or deploy in a totally different area, they tend to be doing that through fiber, greenfield kind of deployments where there's not existing service. At least they don't have existing service. Because it's just, they're already deploying fiber. If they're going to do that wireline broadband, they might as well go fiber all the way rather than just doing fiber most of the way and then continuing their HFC plan. So cable operators are doing that. Obviously, telcos are doing that. Other entities that are getting into the business, whether that be a municipality or an electric membership co-op, they're all deploying fiber. I mean, that's where a lot of the focus is. But fixed wireless still has a play here. And there were a couple of stories that brought that to mind, so I wanted to talk about that. And specifically, there's the idea of fiber is going to take a while to put in the ground, and then also it's going to be more expensive. It can't reach everywhere. So there's different reasons why fixed wireless is still an option. You see here, WISPA CEO, fiber doesn't make sense everywhere. Gigabit fixed wireless access gains traction. So take this with a grain of salt, because this is the CEO of WISPA, which is the Wireless Internet Service Provider Association. So they've got skin in the game, right? Just like the Fiber Broadband Association has skin in the game when they're talking about fiber being the best option in most areas. I think they do admit that there may be some areas where it might not be. And I think the folks from WISPA admit that fiber is a good solution in a lot of areas, but they're wanting here to make the point that fiber is not the right solution everywhere, and maybe even if it is a right solution somewhere, maybe it's going to take too long and they should do fixed wireless in the meantime. So as the government gets set to make an unprecedented level of funding available to cover some of the costs of bringing broadband to unserved rural areas, it may not make sense to dedicate funding only to fiber broadband, said Claude Aiken, President and CEO of the Wireless Internet Service Providers Association. Claude Aiken. So not that guy. That's Claude Aikens without the E and an S on the end. So, and plus he's no longer with us. So we're not talking about this dude right here. So again, this is the head of WISPA. Some communities could be unserved for years until fiber gets there, Aiken cautioned. But fixed wireless providers could deploy service supporting speeds of 100 megabits per second downstream and 20 megabits per second upstream within a matter of months, he said. According to Aiken, the states and localities that have responsibility for awarding broadband funding have some leeway in how the money is spent, which is true, and could fund fixed wireless service as an interim measure for serving communities until fiber broadband can be deployed. It's true that they have some leeway. I just don't know if the states are going to say, well, it's going to take too long to get fiber in a particular area. Let's go ahead and fund fixed wireless, because then will they ever fund the fiber? I just don't see that happening. So I think if there's a particular area, unless it's a really difficult to reach area where it's like, well, we could do fiber here at some point 5-10 years down the line, that might be a different situation. But if it's just a matter of the time difference between putting fixed wireless out versus fiber in most normal areas, I don't see them doing that. So I don't think that's really a good point. Aiken also noted that there may be some areas where it may never make sense to deploy fiber, and that's true. He pointed to the example of Wyoming ranches that are 50 miles apart from one another. Even if funding were available to deploy fiber to those ranches, the cost of maintaining the fiber would be prohibitive, he said. And that's true where you've got these areas, we think about the cost, there's going to be a cost to lay that fiber over these expanses in Wyoming, which that's going to be the case wherever you lay fiber. If you've got to lay it over long distances, there's a cost involved. But if you're talking about an area with a larger population, then you get that paid back over time, especially the maintenance part of it, right? So even if you get funded to put the fiber in the ground, if we're talking about, one customer for every, 10, 20, 30, 50 miles, then the revenue that you get back from that is not really going to help you maintain that network, because there is maintenance that's involved. So you're not getting enough revenue to maintain that amount of fiber with that few number of customers. So he makes a good point there. Telecompetitor asked Aiken how extensively gigabit fixed fiber wireless access is being deployed, or fixed wireless access. So gigabit fixed wireless access, it's still relatively nascent, and that's new and not necessarily proven. He said, noting that the technology requires line of sight and covers shorter distances than other fixed wireless access options. And that's true. So when you're talking about millimeter wave, that's where you've got very short distances, lots of small cells, and because of that, it doesn't work well in areas that are not fairly densely populated. He says here you see it in more densely populated areas, such as a town with a population of a few hundred, Aiken said, also noting that tribal providers are also deploying it. And really where we've seen it is in large cities like Chicago, Atlanta, places where Verizon has been going in just particular urban areas and putting it in there because you've got a lot of people very close together. So therefore, you can get small cells close to each other and still serve a lot of people. A small town, it would work as well, I would think. So that is an option for smaller towns, although so is fiber. So there's not as much of a I think there's not as much of an advantage for fixed wireless in a small town versus fiber, because unless that town has got some specific obstacles, like maybe it's very difficult, maybe there's a lot of rock under the ground in certain areas, that kind of thing. Unlike traditional fixed wireless access radios that are typically installed on grain elevators or towers, gigabit fixed wireless access radios, and that would be millimeter wave, can be installed on rooftops and act as repeaters for one another using a mesh approach. So again, those are the small cells I think they're talking about there that go along with that. So there was that story, and then there's this other story in, where is it here? Forbes. So, and it talks about CBRS band, the CBRS band here. So CBRS enables new opportunities for rural broadband. That's Citizens Broadband Radio Service, CBRS. On the tech side, over the last year, we've seen both T-Mobile and Verizon launch wireless broadband services, also called fixed wireless access, or FWA, that leverage speedy new 5G connections, such as those enabled by the debut of critical C-band frequencies. So C-band is one of the slices of spectrum that are in mid-band spectrum. So unlike millimeter wave that I was talking about, where you have to have lots of small cells close to each other and it doesn't travel very far, C-band is in mid-band spectrum, the sweet spot where you can get good propagation that goes pretty far, and it can pass through walls, and you get good speeds. So you get over 100 megabits per second with C-band versus millimeter wave, you can get gigabit, but lower, kind of the low band spectrum, you don't get up to 100 megabits per second a lot of times. So that's not going to be sufficient. So here you're talking about mid-band spectrum, C-band spectrum, that both Verizon, you see Verizon and AT&T participated heavily in the C-band auction. So they are right now rolling out C-band over their fixed wireless access network. So they are covering lots of people all at once. So this is going to continue on throughout this year, where they're going to be rolling out C-band spectrum and covering lots of areas that today would be considered unserved or underserved. You see here it mentions T-Mobile Home Internet, which uses its 2.5 gigahertz mid-band spectrum. They acquired a lot of that spectrum, not quite as fast as the C-band or CBRS, but they acquired that a lot of that spectrum when they acquired Sprint, and they actually did, I think, also participate in some of the CBRS auctions. Verizon's 5G Home uses this 3.7 gigahertz C-band frequencies in many cities, and even speedier millimeter wave in a select few. And again, those are in the really dense areas. That's where they started with. So Verizon didn't have any mid-band spectrum before C-band came out, or nothing to speak of. So they started with 5G, offering it in select cities in very relatively small areas with this really high-speed millimeter wave. T-Mobile, before I think they got a lot of that 2.5 gigahertz, were rolling out 5G on pretty much on their LTE network on low-band spectrum. So it wasn't really that much faster than 4G. And they were kind of claiming, hey, we've got 5G, nationwide 5G coverage, but it really wasn't 5G. But now that they're doing the faster spectrum, kind of more in the mid-band spectrum, it is faster and is more like a 5G experience. One technology that hasn't seen much attention or focus is CBRS, Citizens Band. It's actually Citizens Broadband Radio Service, I believe. I don't think it's Citizen Band Radio Service. That would be like your Citizens Band radio, that, hey, good buddy kind of thing. In fact, I did a broadcast on CBRS. It was a very popular live stream that I did a while back that I will post a link to after this broadcast is done, because it goes through in detail a lot of what he's going to talk about here in this article about how CBRS works. And it's really very interesting the way that they set the spectrum sharing up. So part of the problem is that CBRS isn't very well known or understood, so it has gotten lost in all the noise about 5G. Turns out, however, that using CBRS to create wireless broadband services is a great and cost-effective way for smaller carriers and ISPs to offer broadband in rural communities. Within the past week, both Mercury Broadband, a regional ISP focused on rural areas across 4 western states, Kansas, Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan, and Avista Utilities, an energy company that provides power to regions across 4 northwest states, Washington, Montana, Idaho, and Alaska, debuted CBRS-based fixed wireless access services to the communities they serve. So these guys are rolling out CBRS, and it is a really good solution for smaller operators, whereas Verizon and AT&T competed in the C-band spectrum. CBRS is something that you can actually provide in an unlicensed way. So CBRS spectrum, along with the right kind of beamforming capabilities found in massive MIMO radios, is uniquely well suited to rural environments because signals can travel across long distances, often found between towers and homes in less populous areas. So again, unlike millimeter wave, these beams can go further, and you don't necessarily need to have line of sight. In addition, as a semi-licensed spectrum, CBRS enables free access of up to 80 megahertz of incredibly valuable frequencies throughout what's known as General Authorized Access, or GAA. So that's one of the tiers of licenses that you can get through CBRS, and I'm going to explain that in that broadcast. So if you want to know everything about CBRS, check the link after this broadcast is done, and you can watch that video. For smaller service providers who can't afford the billions of dollars that major carriers recently spent on fully licensed C-band and other mid-band frequencies, this is a game changer. They don't get the exclusive ownership that licensed spectrum provides, meaning that private businesses or even other carriers could theoretically try to use some of the frequencies at the same time, much as multiple people can use the same Wi-Fi frequencies. But practically speaking, there's likely to be little overlap, especially in rural areas. And that's true with CBRS. In a rural area, you're only going to have so many people that are using it, and there is a method to allow sharing of that spectrum where it's most likely to have interference, and it really would be interference, but where you're most likely to have to share that and get bumped off would be in areas where you have a naval station, which a lot of times is right around the coast. So the Navy actually has the first access to the spectrum, but they've set up a spectrum sharing kind of arrangement here where that can work out. So if you're in the middle of a rural area, you're not going to probably run into the Navy either. What they do get, however, is the ability to offer wireless broadband service to rural customers with the same level of convenience as the very latest from some of the biggest carriers, and significantly more flexibility, faster speeds, and often lower prices than current wire-based choices. And again, he's talking here about both AT&T and Verizon bidding on all the C-band spectrum. So they had to bid and pay a lot of money for this spectrum. They've got a license for it. Nobody else can use that spectrum in that area. But with CBRS, you get similar spectrum, and you can use it even if there's other people that are using it licensed or unlicensed in that area. There's a way that you can share the spectrum among those tiers. The new Avista Edge service, for example, is one of the only examples of an energy utility providing broadband internet service. And I'm not sure what he means there, because there's well over 100, probably 200 electric utilities are providing broadband service in one way or another. Sometimes it's fixed wireless, a lot of times it's fiber. So there's a lot of people doing that. What's particularly fascinating, now this is really interesting, what's particularly fascinating about the offering is that it leverages the unique characteristics of its energy company heritage in several different ways. First, the receiving portion of the service consists of a device that connects between the home's electric meter and a power outlet. Second, the broadband service is run over the home's power lines to a small plug-in device that then broadcasts it throughout the house via Wi-Fi. In addition, the service lets you easily monitor your power usage along with your internet access. Well, that's really interesting. So this I was not aware of. So it sounds like it, they connect it up near the power meter, plugs into the house's power, and then it must be using power line technology, either power line technology or something called GHN, to transmit that broadband signal over the power line. So I don't know if you've got a short distance and you're maybe using GHN to a standard wireless router in the house, or if it's you can just plug these in. In other words, you'd have this little small Wi-Fi device that you can plug into the power. You don't have to plug it in other than right into the wall, and then it can broadcast the broadband signal right out in that room. So that's kind of cool the way they're doing that. Something to look at. So again, I thought those were two pretty interesting stories that are basically making the point that while fiber is, again, the future, I think we see that as that's the best option. If you're going to take a lot of this money that we're getting and deploy broadband in an area, it does make sense to do fiber because it's good to get that wire in the ground. It's fairly future-proof. You know, you get speeds right now. It's, you know, easily gigabit service. You can get 10 gig service, XGS PONs coming out. You've got even faster than that coming down the pipe here soon. So fixed wireless is a good option, but fiber is kind of the future, I think. But if you've got an area that's hard to reach, if you want to get out there right now, then fixed wireless is going to be the easiest way to do it, because a lot of this money, you know, we've got money coming out now through ARPA and RDOF and some other things, but a lot of the money that's out there waiting, we won't be seeing that until early 2023. So that being the case, if you are a service provider and you want to go claim some territory right now, it would make sense, if you can't get funded for fiber, to maybe put fixed wireless out there and get your broadband set up, get people signed up, be delivering over 100 megabits per second, and then that area is then served. And then later, if you can get some funds or find the money, then you could overbuild that with fiber. But I don't know about cities doing that. I think the cities, once they get the money and they get the grants and people, I don't think they're going to set somebody up to do fixed wireless and then figure they're going to change it over to fiber later. I just don't see that happening. Thanks for joining me. Hopefully this was interesting. If so, give me a thumbs up and go ahead and click subscribe, click the little bell, and you'll be notified when I'm live. Tomorrow is Tech Tuesday, which I'll be here live at 3 o'clock. So I will see you then. Thanks. Bye-bye.